What do you do as a parent if your son or your daughter is a teenager and they are home alone at night and there's a knock at the door? They open the door, and then you have this strange figure, a ravenous wolf dressed in a sheep's clothing. They smile, they promise your teenage daughter or son all the good things, and they want to come in the house. What is your reaction? What is your advice? A stranger whom you've never met before wants to come into the house where your child is home alone, your teenager, and promises all the goodness, whatever you want, just let me in. What would you do? Now, if you're like most of us, you would probably say, stay away, close the door. But I would dare, and I ask for forgiveness for this, but I would dare to take it a bit further. What if, as a parent, not only you invite him in, but you pay for that person to come in? You actually spend your hard-earned money and invite that stranger to come in. And that person begins to torment your child. Of course, you don't do that, but just hypothetically. And that person begins to torment your teenage daughter, begins to torment her mind, to abuse her mentally, even physically. And your child's life gets worse and worse and worse because of the tormenting of that person. Now, I know no person, no parent wants to do such thing to a child. But tragically, through deception, not willfully, not willingly, but because of deception, this is exactly what's been happening around the world since year 2001, where practices, occult practices, witchcraft, sorcery, Wicca, wizardry, all of these occult practices have been knocking at the doors of our houses, dressed up in a sheep's clothing, but on the inside they are actually ravenous wolves. There is a lot of fantasy games, fantasy movies, films, books, book series about witchcraft. You can, whatever comes to your mind now, if you look in your house, you probably have one of those books in the house. And they show up dressed in innocent clothing. They show up dressed like a TV series about the witch that has power to change things. They dressed up as fantasy books, books of magic, they seem to be imagination. But what actually most people don't know is that it opens up the doors to the real world of witchcraft, the real world of the occult, the real world of the devil. And when teenagers are not trained, and even parents are not discerning, they are actually inviting the devil into their homes. Starting the year 2001, in the Western world, in the US, in the UK, there's been a surge, an exponential increase in witchcraft practices. For example, in the UK, recent scientific studies have shown that there's been a massive increase in Wicca practices from 8,000 practitioners in year 2000 to 1.5 million only 15 years later. From 2001, 2002, when the famous stories on witchcraft like Harry Potter showed up, teenage girls are flocking in masses, having an interest in witchcraft. 50 to 70% in the UK alone. Teenage girls, high school girls show greater and greater increase in witchcraft. So those are not simply fantasies. Those are doorways for the demonic to come in. I had an interesting experience only recently when somebody came home for prayer, and the moment we began praying, the demons started manifesting, started to twist his body around. He was completely. We didn't know what to expect, but what we saw was because of the games he had played, Grand Theft Auto and another games with demonic meaning behind them, murdering people, killing people, spells, casting spells, doing witchcraft. It opened up the doorway for demons to come into this person. So even born again Christians, even born again children of God, if they go about playing with the demonic, they will open up the doors for those things to come inside and to begin to torment. And then torment of the mind begins, torment of the body begins, depression, anxiety. And I want to show you a few statistics of what is been happening when it comes to teenage depression and suicide. The line of increase in interest in witchcraft, the line of practicing witchcraft among teenagers is the same line with the line of depression and anxiety. For example, the New York Times says in 2016, US suicide rate surges to a 30-year high. Chicago Tribune, 2016, US suicide rate surges to 3-decade high. CBS News, 2017, what lies behind the rise in youth suicide? Wall Street Journal, youth suicide behavior is on the rise, especially among young girls. Time Magazine, 2018, more kids are attempting and thinking about suicide. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the US, in 2018, they published an article saying that the suicide rates are rising across the US. The US government alarmed people that suicide rates had jumped by 30% between 2000 and 2016. The rise is especially dramatic among young girls between 10 to 14 years old. In 2019, USA Today says teen suicide is rising. And Business Insider in 2018 says that the US suicide rate has tripled for young girls since the year 2000. The problem is nobody knows what is the root cause of this. We think it's social media, we think of itself as problems of self-image. No. The root cause of these things is demonic, and the root cause is dabbling and opening doors to the occult. They show up at the doors of our houses dressed up in entertainment. They show up in fantasy books, they show up in movies, they show up in games. And when we set our minds on those things, the seeds of evil are being planted in the fields of our hearts. And especially when you're young, that field is fertile, is plain open. And those demonic seeds begin to grow. They are planted, they begin to grow. And a seed, once planted in the ground, it bears fruit according to its liking. So if the seed is evil, if the seed of the demonic is evil, then the fruit itself will also be evil. So if you are a parent, you have a high responsibility to remove the strangers from your house. If your child, your daughter, your son is struggling with anxiety, with depression, with tormenting thoughts, with torments in the mind, depression in the body, pain, you have the responsibility to bring your child to Jesus Christ, and you have the responsibility to seek knowledge, because God says, my people are perishing for lack of knowledge. And what is perishing but death? What is perishing by having life removed from your teenage son or daughter. That's what it means. If you don't have the knowledge, people are perishing. This is the instruction of the Most High. Stay in my path, and you will be away from the path of the destroyer. And Jesus Christ is the way and the path. But the moment you are off the path, you are in the path of the destroyer. And I don't need to convince you, because the results, the outcome speaks by itself. The enemy has come to kill, to steal, and destroy lives. And scientific reports are just counting the casualties. There's nothing more to it. All the articles I've just read to you are simply the scientists, the researchers counting the casualties of what the demonic is doing in people's lives. So as a parent, or even as a teenager, if you struggle with this, come on the narrow path, which is Jesus Christ, abide in his word, and stay away from the path of the destroyer.